We're at part two of my sit down. Last time I left off entering grade 9. So I would have been 13 years old. I also would have been very obese. I would have been weighing in about 315 pounds. We covered a little bit of the amateur wrestling. There wasn't many sports at my high school. There was a basketball team and there was amateur wrestling when I got there. Other than that, you had your volleyball and stuff, but I wasn't in any of that. So I tried out for the basketball team. Uh, didn't really have the drive to play that year. I was focused on other things, and the main focus became pro wrestling. In that, I started searching for schools. And the one school I did find when I was in grade 9 was Ron Hutchinson's. And I emailed them, but you had to be 18 to start. And I knew that to be a pro wrestler, I couldn't be, at my height, 315 pounds. And even though I was fairly agile as a big kid because I was, roughhouse with my friends and everything. But this is really where everything started coming together. We all started backyard wrestling. Even though it wasn't too long ago, there wasn't as many warnings as there was. And also I think because wrestling was at a different state, there wasn't as many huge aerial moves and everything, so it wasn't as dangerous. And backyard wrestling videotapes were big at that time too. So we were backyard wrestling, and also I started working out. I started following a low-carb diet about November of my first year of high school in grade 9. So I started doing a low-carb diet, we were backyard wrestling a lot. And also, that was the first time I ever got introduced into independent wrestling. My mom was driving me home from somewhere, and I saw a poster, and I could have swore that it was a wrestling poster. So I asked my mom to pull over, and I looked at the sign, and it happened, it was that day. It was a Saturday. I remember like it was yesterday. It was happening at the Civic Auditorium. And the main event had Tugboat in it. And I knew Tugboat, from watching all the videotapes when I was smaller, so I was intrigued by it. I called a couple friends, and one friend answered, a friend named Scott, and he said, yeah, I'd love to go to the show with you. So we went to the show, and I'll never forget, I don't remember their names, but I remember the match. It was a little stockier Latino guy against a guy in a mask, and it was very Rey Mysterio-esque mask. And I remember the match being phenomenal. And at that time, it really became apparent that I wanted to be a pro wrestler. That was all I was driven towards. So I remember waiting around after the show to speak with them, and found out they were brothers, and that's where the chemistry came from. And they said they're about a school in Mississauga called Ringmasters, I believe. So I checked into that, and still you needed to be 16. So the wrestling wasn't in luck. And there was a lot of things about being 13 years old, about to turn 14 in December, being 315 pounds in grade 9. I was a little shit disturber. I caused a lot of trouble. I was in fights and everything, partly because I was picked on. But I always stood up for myself. That's one thing that I learned over the years. Obviously, I'm much more calm now, and over the years I got calmer, but I was a little hothead in grade 9. I remember that. So this is where things start really getting interesting. So grade 9's going on. I'm losing weight. By the summer, I was down to 210 pounds. So I'd lost 105 pounds in about 8 months doing a low-carb diet. And I was really strict with it. I didn't have any carbs. I didn't have any sauces. It wasn't the healthiest with it. I was eating bacon and eggs all the time. And before bed snack was bacon with cheese melted on it. But the low-carb diet did help me a lot. And I remember going to a live WWE event. I would say it was in April. And I got a flyer for a wrestling camp in the summer, ages 14 and up. I looked like a sign to me, 14 and up. I had just turned 14 in December. The camp was coming in the summer. I was working a job at a restaurant, I solely got that job to pay for a wrestling ring, which is funny in itself. That was the main goal. I even got a buddy that said he wanted to buy a wrestling ring with me, a job, but he ended up flaking out. But regardless, I was working at the time. I was saving up money to buy a wrestling ring, and I saw this flyer. So I joined the camp and was ready for the 2-week camp. There wasn't too much that happened in that year. Other than that, the losing weight and being prepared for wrestling school was big. But, it was normal, grade 9 student, just going to school, having dreams about pro wrestling. So this is where it gets really, really important to where I am today. Because at 14, I stepped foot into a wrestling training for 2 weeks. Now this is a lot different than most training, and I would not say to do it at age 14. I would not say to go to a wrestling school at age 14. I definitely wouldn't say go to a wrestling school like this, and I'm going to further talk about that because we still have some time today. So I'm 14. I live in Oshawa, Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto, and the school is in Burlington, which is west of Toronto. So, and I'm just east. So for 2 weeks straight, every morning I got up and took a GO train to Burlington. I remember walking in those doors and looking at the wrestling ring and just being in awe. PJ was the head trainer. I can't remember his last name. He was the head trainer for the camp. And Brett Scholl was another guy that helped out during that camp. And it definitely taught me how to bump. And I remember everything coming very quickly to me. Not saying I knew how to put together a match, not saying everything was perfect, but I remember them saying, like, bump, and I could do it right away. And I remember them saying, like, grab a headlock, and I knew how to grab a headlock. And they said, give a hip toss or an arm drag. And those things, I knew how to do them because I was such a wrestling fan. So things came very, very quickly to me. I remember being in class and just always ready to try things, and I was always the first one in the ring. I knew that this was a big sign for me, 14 years old, starting wrestling training. It was a dream come true. So I learned quite a bit actually in 2 weeks. Still basics, but during those 2 weeks, the whole idea was have this 2-week camp and then invite your family to watch the show at the end. Of course, the family had to pay $10 a ticket. And there was an athletic commission in Ontario at the time, so the shyster that owned the wrestling school came up with this thing that it was a membership to the gym. So it was a $10 membership for the month, but he only ran one show a month. So really, you're just paying $10 for a ticket. But I mean, he got away with it, and the commission, wasn't any wiser because at that time you had to be 18 to wrestle in Ontario. So I remember doing the camp and then doing that first match, and I wore zebra print trunks, I believe, and borrowed white boots that were at the school because at that time, for that quick 2 weeks, I was a favorite student because I learned so quickly. I might be wrong with the gear though. I know I wore some kind of wrestling gear, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I'll have to find the VHS tape and try to transfer it onto online and show people because, man, it was a trip. So that was my summer. I was 14 years old, now going into grade 10. I'd lost a bunch of weight. I religiously started working out. In grade 10, things started coming more too, Funny story coming out of grade 10. I would wake up every morning at 5. I would have my breakfast. I would go work out because the gym was on the way to the school. And then after school, I would then go to the gym again. And then I would come home. And Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I would take the GO train to Burlington to continue training. Again, the training was like $75 a month, so I couldn't pass it up. But now that I'm wiser to the world of pro wrestling and really how good training can be, I know it wasn't the right move, but at least I got my foot in the door. I was learning how to bump, I was learning how to do stuff. And that year, a guy named Connor came in, and for anybody who's watching this from back home, he wrestled as Tarantula Gomez. So he started at this school, and we were married to each other, and that means that we would always get in the ring together. We'd always try new things. That was the year that I started really catching on to independent wrestling. Like, I got my hands on all the ECWA Super 8 tournaments. I got my hands on the first Ring of Honor show. I got my hands on CZW Best of the Best tournaments, I was just wanted to wrestle so bad, and I started doing a lot of Christopher Daniels offense at that school. I was 15 years old almost now, and Christopher Daniels was my guy at that point, and I was doing a lot of his offense. My finish was the Angel's Wings, so I really looked up to him at that point, and just watching all that wrestling. And I remember, it started shaping me too, because even though I was just kind of doing whatever, as a wrestling fan, you try to do a little bit of everything. You start mixing stuff, and I remember Best of the Best too. would have been 2002, and everybody was clamoring about Jody Fleisch against Johnny Storm, but man, B-Boy against Super Dragon, that was more my style, you know, people just beating the crap out of each other and hitting hard and doing head drops and stuff. Obviously, you know, head drops aren't safe, but at that time, that was just what I clamored towards. I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is like the Japanese stuff that I've been watching. So you could see that was kind of the style that really stood out to me, even at a young age. Grade 10, I ended up making the basketball team and playing. I had quit amateur wrestling because my coach kind of made me pick between pro wrestling and amateur wrestling, and obviously I was going to choose pro wrestling. And that was really most of my high school years was just focused on wrestling. But I was still working at the restaurant. That summer, before grade 11, I got a construction job through a family friend. So that was making good money, and it was a lot of moving around, a lot of still lifting stuff. So it helped with wanting to be a wrestler. I felt, you know, that grit of hard work. You know, it teaches you how to be an adult, teaches you how to be responsible, and that's what you need to be a pro wrestler, especially at such a young age. So grade 11, my high school got a baseball team. I tried out and made as a first baseman, but tournaments in Canada were played on weekends. So my coach said, you either want to play baseball or you want to wrestle. I chose wrestling. And then lacrosse came around, and I ended up playing lacrosse for a year. I loved lacrosse. You know, it was more my style too, because you just kind of, I played defense, so I just got to hit people. And that was what I wanted to do. All through this time, I was still going to the wrestling school. And still having weight problems. You know, I was still working out religiously, still doing all that, but you fluctuate. You know, when you're used to being 315 pounds and you like food as much as I do, you fluctuate your weight. But high school was really about just learning how to wrestle. You know, I remember grade 9 and grade 10, school took a backseat to wrestling. And grade 11, grade 12, it also took a backseat, but I knew that I had to get good grades. I knew that I had to go to college to have a backup plan. So in grade 11 and 12, I kind of smartened up. You know, I wasn't the guy who was causing troubles. I wasn't getting in fights. I was really focusing on my grades at the time, even though I was still wrestling. Now moving into grade 12, I was 16, turning 17 at the end of in December, and I found a real school. It was Squared Circle Wrestling, and at Squared Circle, the guy who owned the gym was Rob Fuego. But at that time, he didn't get in the ring too much. You know, he taught us a little bit, but I remember having a lot of classes with Joe Legend and Tyson Dukes. And one of the reasons why I credit Joe Legend and Tyson Dukes as my trainers is because how it was dealt with at the school. You know, we'd run drills. Obviously, I was a little rugged. Yes, I had training, but I didn't have proper training. All I knew how to do was bump and do a couple moves. I didn't know how to put those moves together. I didn't know how to have a match. I didn't know how not to hit people too hard. So the trainer didn't have any, I shouldn't say that. Rob Fuego didn't really, I wasn't in the forefront of his mind. I wasn't the guy at the school. You know, he had his favorites that are already there, James Champagne, Extremo, and Cody 45. And I was just kind of another kid that was paying the $250 a month to train. And I remember sitting beside Tyson Dukes and Joe Legend, and Fuego asked them, you know, who was going to be the guy from the class, who was going to be the guy that was going to succeed, who was the guy that had a future in wrestling, and both of them said me. And